How's it, guys? This is Dayvy FC and welcome back to another Euro Fantasy 2020 video on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to be taking you guys through my team selection for the upcoming Game Week 2 and whether we use the Limitless chip or the wildcard chip or use no chip at all. That's also a viable strategy if you guys do want to go for that. But in this video, I'll be discussing my final team selection before the deadline stream that I will be doing tomorrow, a pre-Game Week 2's deadline. So that's something you're interested in. Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So going over the team review for Game Week 1, what I'm going to be doing is doing the team review in the deadline stream coming up tomorrow, just so that we get the final team selection for Game Week 1. I've got Ronaldo captain tonight, so that game is going on as I'm recording this video right now, so I don't know if he scored or not. Hopefully he has, but you guys, I'm sure, are going to remind me in the comments down below if Ronaldo's got a hat-trick or absolutely blanked. But in the deadline stream tomorrow, I will be doing it, so please pay attention to that because the deadline is going to be midday. I think around South African time it's 3 p.m, so in the UK it will be 2 p.m, so just kind of convert that to wherever you guys are around the world, but it's going to be midday. Luckily it is a public holiday in South Africa, so I will be able to do a deadline stream for you guys, but then I'll be doing the team review, as then I can give you my final rank and the final points that we do accumulate. I think this is how I'm going to be doing it throughout this kind of Euro competition, unfortunately, because the deadlines are so close together, and we do have a fixture the night before the deadline actually, where in FPL we usually have a couple of days break between the fixtures. But I'm sure you guys are doing well in your teams, and you're going to be soaring up the overall ranks, to be honest, because I think our selections have come quite good, and if you guys did go for some variations, you'll do even better than what I'm doing. But going on to my chip strategy, and that's basically what this video is going to be all about, because it's basically going to be whether I use the Limitless chip or the wild card or no chip at all in match day 2 or game week 2 as we are calling it on this channel. So on the chip strategy right now, I've basically locked in that I will be using my wild card in the quarterfinals, and the reason for that is that it just allows me to get some freedom in that round of 16 wild card where I can just go for some fixtures based on only the round of 16 and then have a fresh team going into the quarterfinals, and that also prepares for some potential upsets. I mean, imagine North Macedonia qualify and beat out France in the round of 16. I'm pretty sure a lot of us would have tripled up on those French players, and then they're going to be completely knocked out of the competition. And I think you only have 3 transfers before the quarterfinals. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that might be not enough to kind of get those deadwood players out of our sides and bring in some fresh options going into the quarterfinals. So I've locked in the wild card in the quarterfinals, so that leads me with one chip and one chip only, and that's going to be the Limitless chip. So do I use the Limitless chip in game week 2 or game week 3? That's what we're going to be discussing in the upcoming talking points before finally doing my team selection, talking about what chip, if I use a chip, and what my team is going to be looking like for the upcoming game week 2 deadline. So going over some pros and cons, please forgive me that the graphics aren't that great for this talking point. I basically just wanted to jot some ideas down on some pros and cons of using the Limitless chip in game week 2 and game week 3, because I really do want to watch that Portugal game, because I do have Ronaldo captain, so I'm pretty sure you guys will forgive me for the lack of graphics on this one. But pros, cons of using the Limitless chip, starting off with game week 2, the pro and the con actually is going to be that this game week is going to be quite competitive. And why I mean it's a pro and a con, just think about this. So from a pro point of view, the teams are still going to want to qualify. Basically any side that has not even got a result can still qualify for the knockout stages, so any team can win in game week 2, and then if they do a good performance in game week 3, they can even qualify for those knockout stages. So it's going to be quite a competitive game week, and that's going to be a good thing because teams are hopefully going to be on their best form, scoring the most goals, keeping the best clean sheets. But that's also a con because we're going to see games that are going to be quite close because both sides are going to want to win the fixture, and that's why, for example, we saw with Croatia versus England, the two favorites for that group, it was quite a boring game, to be honest. I'm pretty sure there'll be some of you that argue with me on that one, but in terms of the first half, wasn't much action there, but then England scored the winner in the second half. But overall the game was pretty dead in my opinion, and that's just because both sides are super competitive. I didn't want to kind of lose to each other, and then that leads to quite close encounters, so that's why it is a con. And in game week 2 we could see some close encounters here. Obviously this is an exaggeration of me talking about Croatia versus England, because every fixture in game week 2 isn't going to revolve around such good teams as Croatia versus England. It's going to be a better team versus a worse team, it could still be competitive, but you do always expect the better team to get the result. So that's why it is a pro and a con, but I think more on the pro side of things, to be honest. And then also another pro there is going to be known lineups. So yes, because it is a competitive game week, hopefully most teams should set out their strongest starting 11s, and we do have a good indication of those after game week 1. So game week 1 gave us a good insight into what the strongest, inverted commas, starting 11 of the respective nations is going to be, and we can kind of use that knowledge to get some really good squads in game week 2 for our own fantasy team, and hopefully get some nailed options with the Limitless chip. And there's no excuse not to get nailed players, because you obviously do have an unlimited budget, so you can go for the most expensive options, and just they should definitely start, and then they should get some potential for some points. Then the last point is going to be the big hitter point, and what I mean by this is the most expensive players in Euro Fantasy should start in game week 2. In game week 3, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on with the rotation, but in game week 2, I don't think there's going to be too much rotation. So your Harry Kanes, your Mbappes, your Griezmanns, your Lukakus should 100% start for the respective nations. So that's why it is a pro that the big hitters should start, and they should hopefully get the biggest scores possible out of the other players in Euro Fantasy. Now going on to game week 3 and whether you guys should use the Limitless in game week 3, starting off with the pros, it's definitely going to be more differential. And why differential? That's going to be linked to the first con there, which is going to be that I think there's going to be mass rotation in game week 3. This is just because I think most sides who win both their fixtures in game week 1 and 2 should basically be nailed for those knockout stages, so there could be some rotation. I mean, these benches of these stronger teams are absolutely sensational, so I'm pretty sure that those benches should still get results, and that's where the differential aspect comes in, because you can still get really good players, but now they're going to be lowly owned because they might not have started in game week 1 or game week 2, and now in game week 3 they can get their chance to shine. And you must also remember that they could get their chance to actually play into the starting 11 going into those knockout stages. So differentials, rotation go hand in hand there, and that is a pro and con of using it in match day 3. And then obviously it might not be as competitive in game week 3, and that's why we kind of linked it to that rotation, that differentials, because most sides should know if they're going to be going through, and if a team has got 0 wins or maybe a draw, they're going to know that they don't have a good chance of getting out of the group, and then they might be a little bit less competitive going into that game. So that actually could be a pro, because if you have played kind of a FIFA World Cup, you will know the fantasy for the 3rd and 4th playoff is basically the game that you target for those final stages, because none of the teams really care if they finish 3rd and 4th, so there usually is quite a lot of goals in that. So game week 3 could be an absolute goal fest, which could be more of a pro, but I see it more of a con, because I think most teams, if they're winning 1-0, 2-0, they might not be as competitive to push that for a 3-0, 4-0 in my opinion. But then final talking point of a pro for game week 3 is that the fixtures on paper are actually better than game week 2. So we have stronger teams playing weaker opposition on paper, so that could kind of lead to higher scores or more points for your FPL squad, but then you obviously do have that rotation to deal with. But on paper the fixtures are better, so if you are kind of a fixture manager in FPL and Euro Fantasy, I think that the Limitless chip could be prioritized for game week 3 instead of game week 2. But go over these pros and cons. This is more of a general aspect. Look at your own squad, take an analysis of that, and then hopefully that leads you to a position of where you can make a decision of whether you use the Limitless chip in game week 2 or game week 3. So I'm going to be going over my team selection firstly with no transfers made. So yes, this is my game week 1 lineup. What I kind of wanted to do is give you guys some context and to just look at the squad so that when I do make my decision, it gives you some background on why I potentially did use it. So starting off with the talking points about this potential starting 11. So going off the starting 11 here, you can see that I'm heavily reliant on a couple of nations. Firstly, it's going to be Belgium. Secondly, Netherlands. Third, Spain. And then fourth, it's going to be Italy. So I've got a double up or more on each of those respective teams that I've just mentioned. So I am kind of focusing on those sides, and I'll be talking about their fixtures later on when I look at whether I'm going to be using it in game week 2 or game week 3 in terms of the Limitless chip. But also another talking point there is going to be the defense. So yes, I went with a complete 4.5 defense. In retrospect, in hindsight, that looks like a wrong decision there, because you saw on the weekend we did have some rotation for Netherlands and also Belgium. So Denia and Vindal didn't start for their teams, and that was quite disappointing, because if you watch the games, Belgium did keep a clean sheet. So I mean, Denia could actually have been in that lineup, and I still think he would have kept a clean sheet, to be honest. So maybe a little bit disappointing there that he didn't keep it. But then also with Vindal, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a 50-50 between him and Patrick van Arnold. I don't think van Arnold was particularly sensational against that Ukraine side. So I mean, Vindal could start in this game, but it is against Austria, who are quite strong strong going forward, so maybe he doesn't keep a clean sheet anyways. But in terms of the defense, I'm going to have to play my Danish defenders there if Denayer or Vindal doesn't start, and they face Belgium. So not a clean sheet in my opinion in that game, unfortunately for Denmark. And then we also have Pau Torres there, who will be facing Lewandowski, who Poland didn't have a great performance against Slovakia, but it is Lewandowski. He could always score against them, and I mean Pau Torres will then lose his clean sheet. But I'm a little bit worried about this 4.5 million defense, but also in game week 3, what's going to happen? There could be some rotation. So yes, Vindal, Denayer, those kind of players should potentially start in game week 3, to be honest. And then I mean, I'm perfectly fine with keeping them for that match day 3, but then that leads me to maybe look at game week 2 to use the Limitless chip. In terms of the overall team selection, I don't think the fixtures are too bad. If I had to use my 2 free transfers, I probably would take out Cristiano Ronaldo and then Christian Eriksen. So unfortunately, Christian Eriksen, with that kind of medical emergency, has managed to recover slightly from it. I don't think he'll be playing in the Euro 2020s, but I definitely think that he was my best player in game week 1. So I am perfectly happy with having him in that game week 1 side. But it is a game, it is Euro Fantasy, so unfortunately I will be having to take Eriksen out. And then the 2 players that I will be looking to bring in are going to be one of the French strikers, so Mbappe or Griezmann, and then I'll look to take Eriksen out and bring in one of the English midfielders. So Sterling, Foden, whoever I think will start. But when I bring those 2 players into my starting 11, the starting 11 looks a lot better, to be honest, and that's why I think that it might be one of those decisions where if I stick with this team, it actually could do quite well. We've got Depay against Austria who could perform. We've got Berardi, Insigne, those players could do well against Switzerland. And if I did use my Limitless chip, I don't think I would have Depay or Berardi in my starting 11 or on my bench, which kind of leads me to one of the situations where do I stick or do I twist, similar to the captaincy debate that we have had this week. So Ferran Torres could still do well, but I just think in terms of that competitive nature, game week 2 could be the game week that I do use the Limitless, because I just think it's more nailed for these players. But then we get to game week 3 and there could be potential rotation here. I mean, Berardi and Chiesa might rotate there. As I mentioned, these top sides have really good benches, and I'm pretty sure that those players are going to at least want to have started one game in Euro 2020, and that's why I think that match day 3 could come the time where we do see some of these rotation players coming into the lineup and more of our nailed starting 11 players finding themselves on the bench. So as I mentioned when I went over my current team selection, I'm heavily reliant on 4 nations, Spain, Netherlands, Denmark and Italy. So what I wanted to do is, as you know, with the Limitless chip, you do go back to the team that you had the previous game week. So if I do use it in game week 2, I will be having my game week 1 side in game week 3. So I wanted to look at the fixtures for those respective nations, and you can see Spain face Slovakia, Netherlands face North Macedonia, Denmark face Russia, and finally Italy face Wales. So on paper, these fixtures actually look quite good for my respective teams, but as I mentioned, there could be rotation here, so the players that I have in my starting 11 or my bench right now might not even feature, and that's just something that I'm going to have to take on the chin. But then also, if I use the Limitless in game week 3, there could still be some rotation there, and I can't really plan for that on a Limitless chip. So I currently think I'm leaning towards using the Limitless chip in match day 2 rather, and then just preparing for game week 3 when we do have it. We're going to have 2 game weeks under our belt. Hopefully we can kind of predict who's going to start in the starting 11s of those respective teams that we're currently focusing on. But I do think that I would rather focus on this competitive game week 2 and use the Limitless then and get the full reward of it, besides going for the rotation of game week 3 and just kind of taking a 50-50 on players that I potentially think will start. So going with the Limitless draft, I did create a Limitless draft video yesterday, but I have edited that team and I'll be running through the team and talking about those changes that I did make to the draft yesterday, so stay tuned for that. But starting off with the goalkeepers, I've got Bushchan and I've got Shunin here. So Shunin actually starts against Finland in match day 1 of game week 2, so he should be on the lineup, and that kind of leads me to my first talking point. Please don't take this team as gospel or as the confirmed team for game week 2. I just kind of looked at this team for the starting 11 that I think will score the most points, but as you guys can do if you do make this lineup, just rotate it according to the dates and the fixtures that these players do face. As you know, in Euro Fantasy you can make changes as you do please, so please do that. This is just the starting 11 that I think will score the most points, or the team that I think I'm most confident in getting me the most returns. So Bushchan comes in here against North Macedonia, but then obviously Russia face Finland, which is also a great fixture for the Russian goalkeeper on my bench. Going on that double up of that North Macedonian fixture, I've then gone for Zinchenko, an out of position player for that Ukraine side, playing in midfield but is listed as a defender. So not only does he have that attacking threat of a midfielder, but then he also has that clean sheet threat of a defender. So he's 100% nailed against North Macedonia in my own starting 11. And then I got Belgium's Munier against Denmark. I mentioned that I do think Denmark will do quite well against that Danish side. Unfortunately, with the whole travesty that they have had against Finland, didn't look that strong. So I think a Belgium side should do the work against them. And I mean, Munier, with Castagna out injured, he's going to be nailed in that starting 11. And I think that he could do well from an attacking and a defensive point of view. Spinazzola is exactly the same as Munier, attacking and defensive threat. And Italy looked really strong against Turkey. So against a Switzerland side that I think they definitely can keep a clean sheet. And I might be hoping for Spinazzola to get yet another attacking return in my kind of starting 11. The two defenders on my bench, I then have taken Jordi Alba out and I've brought in Dumfries from the Netherlands just because I think I favor him. And I think he had a ridiculous stat like the most chances in the box or the most touches in the box or something like that. So from a defender point of view, that looks absolutely great. And against Austria, I still think he could do quite well, even though Austria are quite good on the attack. And then also I've got Pavard here against Hungary for France. So I had a question yesterday in my Limitless draft of Pavard versus Hernandez, and to be honest, it's kind of a 50-50 there. I would monitor the game tonight where France take on Germany and then just make my decision based on that game instead of kind of just going for one of these options and hoping that they do the best. But between Pavard, Hernandez, I don't think there's too much in that, and kind of just go with the one that you see tonight performs the best. The midfield department, I still have Sterling here, so I do want some England coverage. Whether Sterling starts or not, I don't really know. I'm going to kind of link this to Kevin De Bruyne because now that Kevin De Bruyne is back in training, I took out Phil Foden and I brought Kevin De Bruyne back in just because I can't really predict who's going to start in that English lineup. Obviously with De Bruyne, we don't know if he's going to be playing, but because he's back in training, I do think there's a good chance that he will start against Denmark, and then Belgium can kind of wrap up that group as group winners. But with Sterling, Foden, really hard to predict who's going to start. So I kind of just gone for one England midfielder. I think the most nailed option definitely will be Harry Kane. So if you guys can fit him into your forward lineups, maybe look at him, but I simply can't fit him in right now. Kevin De Bruyne, great option against Denmark. And then I've gone for Insigne against Switzerland. Just I mentioned Italy, such a quality side in the Euros this kind of season. So I think that Insigne could still do well. And I got Yarmolenko from Ukraine, kind of combining with that double up in defense, because I think against North Macedonia, Ukraine could put a couple past them. On the bench, my final midfielder is going to be Gareth Bale still. Starts in the first match day of the game week. So I mean, if you put him on your side, take him off, there's no kind of concern on the Limitless chip with this unlimited budget. And I do think that him and Wales could do something against Turkey, because I really wasn't impressed with how they played against Italy. The forward lineup is absolutely stacked here, and that's why a Harry Kane can't fit in. I've got Griezmann and Mbappe as my double up in that French attack, and then I've also gone for Lukaku. So just monitor the game tonight. If Benzema's back, you could also look at him, or maybe if Giroud starts, you could also I took out Coman from my lineup because I just thought from a midfielder point of view, I think that France favor that front two as an attack instead of going for some wide options in terms of wingers. So I mean, Griezmann, Mbappe should be nailed in that starting 11. And against the Hungary side that we'll see tonight, if Portugal thrash them, I reckon that France will do the same. So that's why I think a double up on that French attack is absolutely essential if you guys are on the Limitless chip. And then the final attack is going to be Lukaku against Denmark. Kind of going for that golden boot, got a really good chance, probably the favorite to get it. And I mean, Belgium are looking red hot, so I really do favor Lukaku to score a couple against that Denmark defense. But this is going to be the kind of lineup that I have currently made. But obviously check the deadline stream tomorrow for my final Limitless draft that I will be creating going into that deadline. So as I mentioned, just be there if you want to get the most updated draft as possible. But this is basically a wrap the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did, and subscribe if you're new or have not subscribed yet. Let me know down in the comments below whether you guys are using a wild card, a Limitless chip in game week 2 or 3, and why you're going for that specific strategy. And then also comment your guys' teams down below if you are using the Limitless or the wild card, as I always am interested to see what you guys are kind of going for, and if there are any kind of hidden gems that you guys have uncovered in game week 1. But I'm only signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers. Bye.